Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Somm TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. On today's episode, I am going to talk with two of my favorites in the wine business, Elaine Chukan Brown and Kelli White, both incredible wine writers, both really, really funny people, and both some of the most traveled people that I've ever worked with. We're going to talk about our favorite wine cellars we've been in. And the three of us combined, let's just say we've been in a lot. And some of these wine cellars, they range from the great wineries of the world to these hidden little nooks and crannies. And this was a hard one to do. It's been a long time coming. So the three of us are going to deliberate what are our top 3 wine cellars that we've been in. A lot of fun. I want to tell you, we have all new episodes on Somm TV. There's a brand new Drink a Bottle up. And if you have Somm TV, you can watch this podcast with coverage and you can see the wineries we are talking about. So go to sommtv.com, $49.99 for an entire year, and subscribe there and watch it on any major streaming device you have. Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire Stick, your iOS device, your Android, everything. SommTV.com. Today's episode is brought to you by Collective Napa Valley. Collective Napa Valley for news and updates on Napa Valley's latest vintage, which is coming very soon, including exclusive videos of leading grape growers, viticulturalists, and winemakers. Be sure to visit harvestnapa.com. How are the grapes looking this year? What are we expecting from the vintage? Will this be another great harvest from Napa? Yeah, it's going to be. You can keep up with it all at harvestnapa.com. And if you're a wine collector or a wine drinker, you really, really want to do that. Without further ado, my friends Kelli White and Elaine Chukan Brown with the best cellars. It is a true honor to have both of you guys on the show today. Kelli, you are somebody who, as a wine writer, was one of my first exposures to how good wine writing can be. And I know that you think that's funny when I say that, but it is truly like, I read all of the stuff you wrote at Guild Somm, and it sort of informed a lot of the direction of how I wanted to do wine and look at wine. And then Elaine, you are somebody who I think has done more to change the perception of wine writing for a number of reasons than anybody. And that's why having the two of you on to talk about our favorite wine cellars in the world is crazy. I mean, to me, I feel like I'm like talking to celebrities here. Elaine, you've been on the pod. Kelli, you've been on the pod. This is nothing new, but it's to get you both in one place is like getting Kevin Durant on the Golden State Warriors when that happened. It's really a big deal. I know you're basketball fans. So
huge.
B-ball.
I got to tell you, Jason, that when you sent the email to ask if Kelli and I would do this, I didn't read the email. I just saw that you wanted Kelli and I to do something, and I responded yes, and then went back and read what we were supposed to do, and I was like, oh God, okay, wait, am I prepared for? Okay, I think this will be okay. But yeah, no, it was immediate yes. So thank you.
Well, actually, the story gets a little funnier because I did the same thing, and then when I went back and read it, and you said your favorite cellars, I thought you meant private collector cellars, and I'm racking my brains, and I'm thinking, gosh, I really don't know. I'm sure there are nutty ones out there, but I can't think of any. So I emailed Elaine privately off the group email, and I said, Elaine, I said yes because I wanted to do something with you, but I have nothing to say on this topic. And she writes back all caps, oh my God, me too. What are we going to do? So we got on the phone and we were talking about like private cellars. What did you have one from Weekend?
Well, and I was like, oh my God, what if we just flip this on its head and we only talk about private collector cellars we've seen in movies? And so it'll be like all Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, a couple of scenes from Star Trek.
That might need to be a podcast. Literally might have to be a podcast. So don't spoil that. Everyone who listens knows I'll do anything to cheat and talk about movies instead of wine. So I am like, could not be something I'm more interested in. No. We were talking about, the three of us have traveled. We've been fortunate enough to travel a lot more than a lot of people get a chance to do. And we've been in a lot of amazing wineries, and a lot of those amazing wineries have amazing cellars. And how you rate a cellar is not, we can kind of get into that. The only thing I care about is you're either storing barrels, storing wine, or that space is used for that most of the time, So if it's, a tasting room that's beautiful, but they have no wine on site, I think it would be exempt, kind of is how I would sort of rate this kind of a situation. Obviously, if you watch the films and the shows, a lot of the ones I have picked are not going to be a big surprise. I'm trying to go outside of the norm, and the problem is some are just so iconic for me that it's really hard. But we've all picked 3, right? You have come with 3 wine cellars of which we're kind of defining. And why don't we start, Kelli, just arbitrarily with you? with your number 3. If we have any overlaps, we'll all talk about our overlap when somebody mentions it, but I don't think that there are any overlaps. So Kelli, why don't you talk about your number 3 cellar?
Okay, so my number 3 cellar is a bit obscure, if only because I think this winery has only intermittently been imported into the United States, but there's been an odd amount of overlap between my career in this winery. Not even my career, my life, which I'll explain a bit, but it's Melsheimer in the Mosel, specifically in the Mittelmosel. So for those who are probably more familiar, their most famous neighbors, Clemens Busch. So they're right in that kind of area. And it's a really special place for a lot of reasons, but basically, it's kind of one of those old school house on top of wine cellar, and the wine cellar is partially underground. And I may be not exactly right in my recollection. It's been a long time since I visited, and I have a very romantic memory of things. So
that's what's so great about this.
I could be a little wrong, just as a caveat. But what I want to say, my memory of, which is probably at least 75% fact, is that when the next generation Torsten took over, who's kind of like our age, right? When he took over, he started to change some of his father's practices, which I think is the normal course of things, right? And one of the things that he spearheaded was a return to using ambient yeast for fermentation. And in the Mosel, when it's, really high acid and really cold, like that takes a long time, right? These sort of ambient fermentations take months. And so the problem that he had is that their cellar often floods in the winter. And so he has these like old German oak, these old barrels that are just black and slimy and amazing looking, full of wine that then becomes routinely kind of submerged in the winter. And my memory
they go underwater? These barrels actually go underwater in the winter?
At least partially, sometimes all the way. So my memory is that he had to take these sort of kind of tubing and run it from the bung up like a story and kind of out through the floor so that the CO2 has a place to escape. I mean, obviously now we've got people like aging wine underwater and things like that. So like being underwater doesn't necessarily adversely affect a wine or the barrel. The water isn't getting in the barrel. The wine isn't getting out into the water. It's more of just the gas needs a place to escape to. Because when these are, probably century-old barrels, you're sort of past the point of oxygen exchange really anyway and porosity. But I just thought that was really beautiful on a lot of levels because it was this kind of like, well, I could hurry up this fermentation before the winter rains to get these barrels out of here or, whatever. I could make my life easy, but I believe in this thing so much that I'm going to, kind of go against man and nature to make a way to make this work. I thought that was really special.
I love that in the United States, what you do to piss off your parents is you shave the side of your head, maybe get an earring or a tattoo. In Germany, they use native yeast. It's pretty good. It's very different.
Whatever you got to do to stick it to the man. I know that he's also like really into like really kind of intense German metal. Like when I was over there,
so was Elaine. So I'll let her talk.
He gave me this goofy like German metal album called Die Totenhosen, which I think translates to the Dead Pants. I still have it, Torsten.
There is.
If you're listening.
This is so great.
I love the way that metal culture shows up in Europe, though, especially, like here in the States, it's so different. But like, as a slight contrast, I was touring parts of, like, it was southern Spain, northern Portugal. And by total accident, I met a metal bagpiper. So,
yeah, of course. They're everywhere there.
Well, and so then I was like, wait, what? And could you play some? And so he brought out his bagpipe, and the bagpipe case was covered in anarchy stickers. Like that part's recognizable, but then he took out a bagpipe and played hardcore metal bagpipe. And it was just like, and then went straight into like lullaby bagpipes, which just doesn't work quite as well.
Lullaby bagpipes, not relaxing.
No, but I don't know. I'm not sure how metal bagpipe gets either. So in both directions, there's like limits on the effectiveness of the bagpipe,
I mean, I don't know what to say. Kelly's first pick has German metal and barrels that flood. And I don't know how we're going to top that. So say the name of the winery, Melsheimer?
Melsheimer, Melsheimer. Interestingly, let me just add one more weird layer to it. So I started in the wine industry in college, but I majored in art history, and I did a kind of a last gasp in the art world before kind of fully committing to the wine industry. And so for that, I did like a 6-month internship at the Chinati Foundation in Marfa that had visiting artists. And so while I am there, we had a visiting artist from Germany named Isa Melsheimer. And she was the most amazing artist in this part of Texas. It's a high plains desert that's like has distant mountains. And she would do this thing where she would collect all the interns, would like drink a ton, right? Your interns, that's what you do. So everybody had beer and wine and, things. And so she would come around every couple of days and collect everybody's empty glasses. And I thought, well, Issa's super into recycling. That's great. But what she was doing is she was smashing them. And then she reconstructed what am I thinking of? The vista, the view of the mountains from these glass shards. Like they made these mountains out of this different colored glass. It was the most beautiful sculpture some of the most beautiful sculpture I've ever seen. Anyway, she was like, "Oh, you were in the wine industry." Because like Mein Brutter is in the wine industry. Has this winery in the Mosel. And then basically my first job when I moved to New York City was this obscure German wine importer that was like, "Oh, I have this brand called Melsheimer." I was like, "No way." Anyway, wow. And then I ended up working for several different companies that at certain points have tried to get this brand to penetrate in the US, but it's just it's a cool wine. Their wines are great also.
Amazing. Well, a cellar that floods, come for the wine, stay for the metal. That's what I would say.
Die Totenhausen.
Amazing. What is your number 3? What is your number 3, Elaine?
It's so mundane, my God.
I know.
Comparison, I feel like, okay, great. That was an awesome podcast. Thanks to both of you. Happy to have been here. But yeah, so, but I mean, there's a parallel just in that my third one has this kind of personal life influence sort of relevance for me too. But mine is actually Irie from Oregon, Eyrie, Irie. And in that, I had already gotten into wine and was studying wine and learning about it and things like that. But I ended up having, they make this very small amount of still Pinot Meunier. And, at the time that I had it, they were one of the very few that did it in the States, and still in the world. There aren't that many people that make a still red Pinot Meunier. But I ended up having one of these from Irie, and weirdly is the first wine I ever had from Irie. But the wine just was really confounding and beautiful to me. And it was actually the wine that made me realize I had to chuck what I was doing and go into wine, because I needed to invest my time to understand what it was I was seeing. And so then, so Irie made me really fall in love with wine, and I couldn't, their story was so remarkable to me because, David Lett, who founded Irie, was the first to plant vines in Willamette Valley. And, in his life was known as Papa Pinot, and now second generation Jason Lett is leading the charge for the winery. But when I got started actually working in wine, I had this little blog. I did drawings on it. It was like this very silly kind of naive sort of project. That's how I got started. And out of nowhere, Jason Lett sent me a message, and he said, "I really hope you keep doing what you're doing. It's so irreverent, and the wine industry needs that." And I was like, "Oh my God, the man that makes this wine that made me go for wine just wrote me." And so he was like, "Well, you should come to Oregon at some point." And then International Pinot Noir Celebration invited me as a media guest that year. And again, I couldn't believe it. I did wine cartoons. Who the hell wanted a wine cartoon media guest? That didn't make any sense. But I went to Oregon, and one of the first wineries to welcome me was Jason at Irie. And so for me personally, it was kind of like what Kelli was just talking about with the synchronicity of all these things coming together. And the idea that this winery that had inspired me would also want to meet me was really surprising and overwhelming. And then going into the actual cellar, it's basically a really old workspace. The main part where they make the wine is like a really old school warehouse. It's this very low ceiling, small space, a series of adjacent rooms. They have to, figure out how to get a barrel into this tiny little closet space and then get it out again, all this crazy stuff. But some of the barrels actually go back to the founding of the winery. And it's the same space they've always made their wine in. And so for me, there's this kind of resonance of history, even though it's only back to the 60s still, the idea that it's all been happening there this whole time. And these vessels actually are original vessels too. I just think that's pretty amazing. And we're lucky in the States, which is so young in so many ways, to have a place that can still do that.
I think that's amazing. Also, I do want to let everybody know you can watch Elaine and Kelli drink a bottle of a very, very aged bottle of that Pinot Meunier on Som TV on the Drink a Bottle episode, which is one of the best ones. And it's great. And that wine was fan-freaking-tastic. It was incredible. It was really, really, really delicious. And I remember stumbling off the set of that shoot, which I'm sure you guys did. You ended with a gin. I don't want to get off topic here because we have a lot of wines to go through here. But I guess it's time for my number 3. And I'm going to tell you, I just switched one. And it was hard for me to make this decision. If you have seen Som 2, you know that we filmed. Originally, I had Domaine della Romanée-Conti at number 3. It's an amazing cellar. It's beautiful. It's got more money than like Fort Knox worth of wine in there. But I started thinking, and when you mentioned Germany, I have had a really hard time because I didn't put any German stuff on my list. I've spent a lot of time filming in Germany. So I'm taking one called Zilliken in the Saar. Zilliken is a winery that, this is great because the cellar itself is one of the most incredible places. It is filled with that beautiful, puffy black cellar mold. And it looks like, if you've seen the movie Labyrinth, it looks like the movie Labyrinth, where you could picture any kind of Muppet popping out of here and saying hi to you and telling you to go down this corner. And it's just such a wild fantasy looking place. And Hanno Zilliken, who is in Som 1, who is a legend, he's the one who turned to me and said, "Und this cellar mold is our pets. You can pet it. You can touch it." And that is in Som 2, where he pets the stuff. And it was a changing moment for me where I truly kind of went from wine is fun, I like a buzz, I like travel, I like history, to all of a sudden it's about absolutely everything. I mean, this was like a nature documentary. And if you watch Som 2, I have this little moment where everybody fawns over their cellar mold and how it grows and how it moves. And this was the first cellar I had been in that looked like a place that I think most Americans would think, if you just walked into it, you'd go, "Oh my God, clean this place." And then you spend 5 more minutes and you realize that would ruin this place if you cleaned it. And so I'm taking Zilliken as one of the most stupendously beautiful cellars. And it's like you said, it's a winery under a house. It's basically, you have the river right there and you have this house and you've got the cellar underneath, and it's ancient. It goes back hundreds of years. And it's beautiful. That's going to be my number 3. I just booted it for DRC. So if you're listening, I am very sorry, Aubert de Villaine.
I'm also impressed that DRC was starting as your 3rd place.
Yeah, I
mean, Jason, you're setting yourself up here. The expectations are enormous now.
Yeah, well, if Cup of Salvation had come out, the Vatican could be on this list, but I'm not going to give any spoilers as to where and what we filmed there. But well, let's hope. I mean, let's hope it goes. What do you have for your number 2, Kelli?
So I am looking locally for my number 2. I selected Kongsgaard in part because it's just a really special winery here that I like a lot.
I should say Kelly's in Napa. You're in Napa.
I'm in Napa. Sorry, yes, okay. I'm in Napa. And Kongsgaard is just a really fun cellar to go to. If you're lucky enough to go there, they are closed to the public. And in fact, I hope I'm not giving anything away. They don't love publicity, so they'd probably be shy that I'd be talking about them at all. But I believe
that's a nice thing to be able to do, to not like publicity. Good for them.
Good for them. Yeah. Nice work if you can get it. I think that what John explained to me is that when they went to the county to get their winery license, they said, and how many visitors would you like to receive each year? And they said 0. And the county had never got an answer like that before. Normally Napa wineries are like, we want as many people as possible. And they're mad that they get such a limited. John was like, how about we let no one in? So, but it's, it's up there where their house is. And so I've been lucky enough to go inside, and what I like about it is it feels like a living room. And it also kind of feels like a madman's workshop. Like, I think sometimes cellars, in the United States, our cellars don't really have that mold, so much. They haven't have the same lived in experience. And I feel like sometimes the cellars feel nervous. Like there's just all this sort of tension and sterility, and that's fine. But the tanks aren't numbered or lettered. They have different composers on them, and they have these little like cheesy computer printouts like taped on. And so you're giving like Mahler a punch down, right? You're not like pumping over tank 45. It's a more intimate kind of personal thing. There's big, if you've seen in wineries, there's a kind of double layer push carts are very common. They're very load bearing. You can put a lot of stuff on there. This is like they've got several like full of vinyl. It feels like a very honest kind of expression of the inside of somebody's mind. I like when people create spaces for themselves that feel like a projection of the inside of their brain to the outside walls. And if you get to know John Kongsgaard, this feels like very authentically him. And he's a very interesting person. So by default, the cellar is pretty compelling.
I love this idea though, too, because then, they also have these like beautiful arcing caves, so instead of just a deep cave, they have these like beautiful arcs to the cave, and then rows of barrels, extended aging Chardonnay down these lovely winding arcs. And so like to overextend your metaphor, it's like long-term memories back there. Like everything sits in peace. Like and that. Eventually, every once in a while it's opened up to revisit but minimally for them because of the style they make wine with. But yeah, no, I love your description.
What was his background? Why the music infusion? Why the...
He has a dual existence, I think, in Napa. He's been a winemaker, I think, his whole life. He's multi-generational Napa family, but he is incredibly deep into the classical music scene, and he was doing a thing. I don't know if he's doing it anymore. When I first moved here, and for several years, that they had chamber music concerts in a local church in Napa that was selected specifically for its acoustics, and it was like for $25 you would see performers that would sell out, stadiums and concert halls that, because they had a relationship with the Kongsgaard family, would want to come to Napa as a little getaway. And, in exchange, we'll perform in this kind of, small town church for no money. And it was this really, when I first moved here, it was like kind of the first, I moved here from New York City, and, I love living in Napa, obviously, but it was a big cultural shift. And it was this like little light that I had that I loved going to when we first got here, that I was like, okay, it's not just like wine here. There's other stuff too. And so it's not like he had a background in that. There's very much dual interests, I think, that emerged.
Interesting. That's great. I love the visual of the vinyls on the push cart. That's awesome. That's really great.
It's a special place.
Good stuff. Elaine, what is your number 2?
My number 2 is going all the way south to Victoria, Australia. So southeastern Australia. This area called Great Western. It's a really remote part of Victoria. It's, you have to drive a couple of hours off just an open desert landscape to get there. And then once you arrive, in the background, there are these really rugged mountains, not super high elevation, but very rugged peaks that create this kind of like one-sided bowl effect for the Great Western area. And, there's something about it that it feels like this intersection of old, spaghetti Western landscape, except also like every movie you've ever seen of old Australia. It's like remote. It feels remote. It's a desert. There's all kinds of desert scrub plants growing. It takes forever to get there. Are you going to die on the side of the road? You don't know, but then,
are there cars like killing each other for gasoline in the wasteland?
Well, I think it's like all on the edge of that happening,
okay, good. And we're all on the edge of that.
the one upside of this drive is that in Australia, or at least in Victoria, I think it's the whole country though, but It's still, of course, illegal to drunk drive, but it's legal to drink while driving. Nice. And so having...
Wait, hold on, I need you to take one step back. What was that?
So in Australia, at least the last time I was there, it was, of course, illegal to drunk drive. Okay. But it was legal to drink while driving. So Australia is full of these like sweeping landscapes and very long desert roads. And so if you're in one of those drives, to have a beer on the way is like, there's nothing like it. And as an American going down there for the first time and finding this out, I was like, oh my God, we're going to do this, right? Like, this is something we have to do, right? You know? And so, yeah, we got to drink beer on the drive there. But then
my mind is blown. I don't know what to say.
No, it is. It's like weird to wrap your head around while doing it too, you know? So, and of course you have to be careful, right? Because you don't want to cross the line of too many beers. But anyway, so in Great Western, there's a winery called Best's Great Western, BEST''S, Best's Great Western. That was the last name of the man who founded it in the 1860s. And one of the things that's remarkable is when you get there, it doesn't look like much. It's like this old wooden building, you know, very old wooden building. It looks like a tiny little place. But it turns out if you kind of push into figuring out what's around you, you'll find some of the oldest Pinot Meunier vines in the world. This is the link, of course, one of the links. Pinot Meunier vines that literally go back to the 1880s. Wow. Still alive, that they make wine from. And then
Elaine's love affair with Pinot Meunier continues.
Yeah. And then but then they have Shiraz vines that go back that far too. You know, and so getting to walk around in the vineyard is pretty amazing. But part of how I ended up visiting them was because of the Pinot Meunier connection. I was kind of hunting it around the world already in Australia. Somebody's like, oh my God, have you had Best's Great Western? I was, no. So I went down there and so they figured out that I loved this stuff, and they have two bottlings, an old vine bottling, a young vine bottling. The young vine bottling's from like the 1970s and the old vine from the 1880s. And so anyway, they're one of these places where you walk into this upgraded shack as the taste, you know, the cellar door, as they would call it, the tasting room. And then you wander through all these, like this series of little rooms that have been added on over time. And then eventually, you know, if you get along well enough, they'll say, well, let's go down in the cellar. And you go down way underground into their old storage room where they have bottles of wine back into the early 1900s. And you like walk through and you can see all of these bottles from all these different years. And they asked me, it was a classic thing. They were like, well, let's have some old Pinot Meunier. What's your birth year? And I told them, and they were like, oh, that's too bad. Here, let's have this year instead.
Yeah, I've had that experience many times. Yeah.
But we did. We had we got to taste vintages of various old wines. One of the weirdest things that was that I got to see there, though, they have this round room. So you go underground, and then there's this little door that's really hard to open. You can walk into, and it's this huge round cement room. And it's actually uncomfortable to be inside of it because if you speak to someone, it echoes so intensely. The sound like bounces around so intensely that it's uncomfortable. The sound is uncomfortable. So we went in for a minute and I realized this and left. And I was like, what is this? It used to be what they fermented all the wine in. And so it's like
in the room,
in this round room,
the room itself.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So they cut a door into it later, but it used to be this underground cement vat. That's like,
the whole room was a vat. Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's it's like a story and a half deep underground, and they would ferment all their wine in there long, long ago. And then when everything moved above ground, they were like, oh, well, let's just try to make this, maybe we could do tastings in here or something. But they realized there's no way to use it because of the sound problem.
It's like a torture chamber now.
Yeah. Or maybe it's a perfect meditation room because if you say anything, it'll punish you.
Oh, interesting. That's how meditation should be.
It actually is like that for me. It's a punishment, so I don't do it.
Yeah.
Elaine, I think I love your love of Pinot Meunier. It's like one of the great loves in wine. It's like it needs to have its own TV show. Like it's you and Pinot Meunier across space and time, like maybe in the style of like Outlander or something.
I see that as being it's going to make a ton of money.
Yeah. Maybe we could like throw some Mad Max in there, you know?
Yeah. Mad Max meets Outlander.
Yeah. And then a little bit of like Scott Bakula kind of feel.
Oh, wow.
I don't know what that is.
No, she's talking about what's it called?
Quantum Leap. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
This like earnest, you know, his naive earnestness. And it's like he's so invested. Every new episode, he's so invested and sincere in the moment in history he goes to. And he's like fully immersed. And then he pops out and he doesn't remember any of it. And that I feel I identify with that.
Look, I have a few irons in the fire that could make me extremely rich. And my first order of business is to make a Mad Max time traveling show about Pinot Meunier starring you, Elaine.
I'm
willing to burn like Amazon Lord of the Rings TV show type money to make this happen.
Yeah, I don't know how this isn't going to fly. You know, like this is a go-to obvious.
We know what the kids want. Well, you know, it's again, now I feel like my number 2 is I'm not going to live up to booting DRC, but my number 2, I'm going to take an apple wine, local to you guys, but a cellar that blew my mind. I mean, blew my mind. And so I have a little bit of a background in biology, and whenever I'm in a cellar that has an ecosystem to it, you have to pull me out of that place with a rope and a chisel. And like Schramsberg is one of them. And if you've seen the Verticals episode on Schramsberg that you can see on Sam TV, you know, first of all, this place has wild history. I mean, it was built by Chinese laborers in the 1800s, and it goes back to a time that is just so sadly easily forgotten for Napa. But they bore these caves out of the hillside. And if I was to knock you out and then you were to come to in this place, you would think I am in Champagne, or I am in maybe somewhere in the Loire or something where they do cremants or something. Like you would never picture that you are in Napa. It has cellar mold. It has, you know, they cellar wine and do a method champagne type style. And people listening to this probably had Schramsberg. But the place is incredible. It has just you can go back so far, and only a little bit of it is open to the public when you do those really expensive tastings in there and whatever else. But it is a mind-boggling space to be in and to see and to know that it exists in America. It just doesn't. I've never seen anything else like it. Have you two been to Schramsberg and gone in those caves? Yeah, it's pretty wild. And then also you have Hugh Davies, who I think is one of the. I don't think he realizes this, but one of the funniest people in wine. He is hilarious, and the things he says are so bonkers. I'm like, I just want to have a talk show with Hugh Davies just to figure out what he's on this podcast, and you can hear him. But it's
you can call it Hugh's on first.
I don't know. I think between this talk show with him and this time travel aggressive sci-fi Pinot Meunier adventure with me, I think let's get something with Kelli going, and I think you're set, Jason.
I think we could more deeply explore this real intersection of heavy metal and wine. I'd like to. I'll go ahead and call dibs on that.
Okay. There's also that whole thing with heavy metal that have like animal singers. I don't know if you guys have gotten into this, but if we can bring that in, I'm totally in.
That's probably the thing that ties all three together. You know, animal singers.
It's like vineyard animals that sing.
We could do crossover episodes, between the three with animal singers.
This is exactly how I wanted this pod to go. Totally, like, very, very focused.
It didn't have another choice. This podcast's fate was determined when it was born.
Oh, it's so good. Well, we're at number ones, and so this is it. If you're on this list, you're a winery, you've made it. This is it. This is all you've wanted. The Sam TV podcast and the three of us pick you as a number one seller. Kelli, what do you got?
Okay, so I got Cellar del Rore, which I very well may be mispronouncing, in Valencia, Spain, which when my husband and I got married, we went to Spain. And because we are broke, I turned half of it into a work trip. And so to get like some flights covered and stuff. So anyway, we went to Valencia kind of mid-honeymoon to learn about Valencian wine and produce some content based on that. And so I really didn't know much about the region or these wines going in, and relied on other people's advice. And so I had no idea what to expect. And so Cellar del Rore is a really fascinating. The wines, first of all, are amazing. And very, very, very reasonable. Truly world-class, like delicious, really fascinating wines. And they're made in a really cool way. So basically, when we went there, you arrive into this big sort of remote kind of dusty property, right? And there's donkeys and animals and barns and things. And you go into the winery and it looks normal, like a normal winery, right? And then they take you to this like thing that they found. And so again, like I didn't fact check my own memory before launching this podcast. So what I think I remember from this was that they kind of purchased the property, not realizing that it also had basically a several 100-year-old amphora cellar underground. And so when you go down, it's these curved paths, and there's like a stone bench to one side that's maybe thigh high. And then there's a series of like lids, right? And so each of these lids along this bench, when you lift it up, is the lid to a very large underground amphora. And again, this whole shebang is several hundred years old, so ancient and forgotten. And so when they bought this property to make these wines, to make a variety of wines, that obviously hadn't been used for a very long time. And I think that probably, most people would have assumed that it would make like a cool museum or, I don't know, reception area or something. But they've actually found that there were several amphora that weren't cracked, that they've kind of rehabilitated and are actually using that cellar in part to make some of their wines, specifically the wines from the local varieties that are really names that have absolutely no penetration in the United States, like Mondo and things like that we've just not heard of, that make these really kind of fun, fresh, vibrant, really lively wines. And it's cool. And there's little like the occasional chute or channel that kind of goes up into the ceiling. And so is a gravity flow, effectively carved rock pathways that juice presumably would go down to go into these amphora. It is really, really cool. And I'm going to send you some pictures so that you can put it up on the podcast for people that are watching this. It's one of the few times in wine where that I've gone down into a quote unquote cellar and really just had my breath taken away. It was so unexpected and so beautiful and so freaking cool that it was just the best. So that's my number one.
Wow.
That's great. That is awesome.
Cool.
I would kill to see that space. That's amazing. I also love I love varietals and grapes that people don't know, don't understand. And then, that stuff boggles my mind. It's my favorite thing to do in Italy is like try to go to Italy and not have Sangiovese at all. Try to just go. I love that, but I mean, it's like it's great to be like, yeah, what's Catalanesca? I'll drink a bunch of that now. It's like that stuff is really fascinating. So that's an amazing story, Kelly. Really awesome.
Thank you.
Really awesome. I'm writing down this winery right now to make sure I can find their wines and weasel my way over for a second honeymoon.
Yeah, write it off. Keep the receipts.
I will, definitely. Elaine, what is your number one?
Well, I didn't expect to stay in Australia for my top two, but
well, you were drinking so many beers.
Well, that's the thing. I can't remember the rest of my life because of the beers while driving in Australia. So, but yeah, so in Hunter Valley Semillon has become one of the world's iconic wines, and so thinking about that, like, why? What's iconic about it? Like, there's no way to replicate it. Like the idea that just this one region in the world expresses this grape this one way. There's other Semillon is a precious grape. Like it can do so many things, and there's definitely good Semillon in other parts of the world. But Hunter Valley Semillon, nowhere else does that. And so in that region, Tyrrell's and their Vat one especially is one of the wines that has really, it's an icon that's helped us reveal an iconic region, and And it has this similar element that it ties into a lot of the Cellars we're talking about, where it's this like multi-generational family effort. So in their case, going back to the 1850s, and when you visit, the whole family really is there, and so Bruce Tyrrell's leading the charge now, but his kids are involved and very present there. And so when I ended up visiting, it's probably 2017 or so that I was last there, and it's just one of these places. Again, this really old wooden shack of a building that when you wander through, there's all these rooms that have sort of been glued together over time, because they kept needing more space. But then as you walk through the cellar, suddenly the floor is falling in one direction, or now there's a little ramp because they had added something on and they had to join it, but they didn't match, and so it's like very rustic. You can walk through the history of creating this icon over time, which is incredible. And then the actual vats that helped them discover this very special niche part of the vineyard, and then what became Vat 1, they're still there, and so when I first visited, we like spent the day in vineyards and then went into the winery and we're walking in the cellar, and then actually ate dinner in the cellar. And so we were eating dinner next to these historic vats. And again, like to bumble off to the bathroom, you had to be careful not to trip over these weird floor changes and things. But like, again, it's this kind of thing we keep talking about, where the magic's not just the look of the place, but the history and how the two come together, and really the one tells the other's story,
That's great. That is so great. I need to get to Australia. I need to spend a lot of time down there. It's so much bigger and grander as far as the depth that I think a lot of people I talk to understand. I just think Australia is thought of not one-dimensionally, but certainly not three-dimensionally in regards to what it does. And so Semillon and Pinot Meunier, we got to add Semillon to your show, because I would say that Semillon is one that I've had a lot of. I often think of it as a blending grape, Bordeaux and so on and so forth. So it's great to hear you champion it as a single.
Well, let me add that in 2017, here in California, my kid and I evacuated from the fires. Thankfully, everything was fine after it was where we were. But we did have to evacuate, and we had to evacuate in a hurry. I had time to grab one bottle of wine, and it was a Hunter Valley Semillon.
Wow.
And the thing about Hunter Valley Semillon, because like you're saying, Semillon is often a blending grape. It can do incredible work for a wine to like fill in the mid palate, give it some body and some gravitas. But Hunter Valley Semillon is like nervy and edgy and energizing even. It's like lights up my brain. Not in a I have to think hard kind of way, but just like I'm ready. I'm alert, And so I love the image, though, Kelli, that you gave earlier about sometimes cellars feel like they're nervous. And so it's like Hunter Valley Semillon is a nervy wine, but then it's made in these old rustic wooden and cement cellars, slow over time. Like the contrast of that is really evocative to me.
And I like that you call it an energizing wine, because I can completely relate to that. It's like, to steal a little lingo from the marijuana industry, it's like some wines give you like a body high, and then some wines give you kind of a mental, mental high, and be really engaging. I completely see that. I was also thinking, like, while you were talking about this winery, I really liked the point that you said, where part of what made the cellar special wasn't just the magic, was in the fact of the place and the history, these sort of different elements coming together. And I think that's what's been interesting to me about this discussion, because Jason could have easily said to us, like, pick the 3 best architectural cellars, or the 3 oldest, but the fact that you left it kind of so open-ended, it's been interesting to see, how ultimately, obviously everything fundamentally is personal. We're building a list of preferences, we're ranking things, but at the same time, like, all these selections have been like the place, yes, but there's also other elements of it in the story, and that just kind of gets back to, I think, what I think is fundamentally special about wine.
Well, and Jason gets to really drive home how profoundly special it is by giving us his number one.
My number one. Yeah, the pressure's on. The pressure's on.
High stakes.
Yeah, high stakes here. Well, my number one, I just really fast, I think it's tough. I think when you walk into wine, I think it's a lot like when you're in middle school or early high school and you see movies and you hear music and that becomes your music, your movies. And so when you get into wine and you get a chance to travel like I have had, some of the wines that, and the places I visited, the wines I've had, they become like my Nirvana or my Jurassic Park that I saw when I was 14 years old and I'll defend to the death. And, like they just become the thing where you're like, this is my time, my period, and you might get into Billy Joel later, right? You might go, I like that music, but that was my mom's music. Or you might get into like German metal like Kelli has so much. You might do that, but you always go back to like these things, for me, it's like you go back to Pearl Jam for me or whatever it is. And it's going to sound weird, but when I went on a trip to Rioja, I was so willing to receive the world of wine in a way that like I couldn't get enough. And I was obsessed with history and all this. And I've never gotten to any point where Lopez de Heredia was not that wine still for me. And I get yelled at all the time when I mention on these podcasts, people are mad at me that they think I'm driving the price up by talking about it so much. And so I just want to tell you, you wine Twitter guy who does not stop yelling at me, I'm sorry, but Lopez de Heredia is the most incredible cellar I've ever stepped foot in. And I have been, luckily, I say this not as a brag, it's my profession, in some of the most crazy cellars you can imagine. I mean, truly in Bordeaux and Vegas, Sicilia, and all these amazing places. I've been to them all. There is nothing like Lopez de Heredia. It is storied. It involves the Spanish Civil War. It involves a family that fought against itself during that time. It involves a region that is both old and very new. They were basically created to help when flocks were wiped out Bordeaux, at least in its modern intonation. And so we went there. Our producer and engineer who's listening to this right now was there with me. And we went there to shoot what was going to be a couple hours of something. And it torrential rained. I mean, like flash flooding raining. So Maria Lopez shut the doors and we spent about 8 hours inside this cellar. And she said to us, there is this room that when my father had set up a tasting in this room way deep in the cellar, and then he died. And no one ever tasted the wines that he set up. She said, why don't we get into those wines? And I said, okay. And she said, but the problem is I don't know what's on that. I don't know what wines they are because the labels, some don't have labels. They have this moth problem that eats through the corks. And so she was like, let's go in there and pull out some old bottles. And to get down there, you walk past thousands and thousands of barrels that go back some 100 years, the wine in this place, it's like, even now I'm like flooded with, it's so hard to describe the smells. It's so tactile, but you're just walking forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. It's like the place you would hide from zombies or something. Like this would be a fortress. It's so big. And so you get all the way down to this room that is several stories below ground. And inside of it are these bottles that are standing up in a corner and then a ton of old wines. And she's like, I haven't been in this room since I was 28 or something, she says. And we're like, how is that possible? And so she tells us the story of their family and the Civil War. You can see this on the Legends of the Vines, Maria Lopez, part of this. So she is just pulling out bottles and we're just filming. This is totally unplanned. And she's pulling the bottles from this tasting that never happened. And she's thinking this bottle's probably from the time right before the Spanish Civil War. So she thinks it's, the 30s and the 20s. And she's like trying to figure out where it is, tells her whole family story. And this bottle just gets built up and built up and built up. Like, what is it going to be like? She pops it open and pours it after saying, a family member died and they were all at odds with each other. And then she smells it and she goes, oh, vinegar, pure vinegar. It was the most amazing. It was the most, like we were hanging on every word she has. And then she goes, fuck. But then she puts a cork in it and she goes, but it's the best vinegar you'll ever have. And she goes, we have it on salad later. Okay. And then so like we open up bottle after bottle after bottle and she is, no one can talk faster and more interesting than Maria Lopez. And then, I think John, myself, Jackson, who shoots the stuff, we couldn't stop looking around going, I cannot believe this day and how it's happening. And then she opened up these back doors to this gigantic barrel room and it goes right up to the river Ebro. And it's just the river's right there. And because it had been raining, it's right up against like licking the doors. And I didn't know if we were 20 feet underground, 1,000 feet. I didn't know. And we were right at ground level on the river when she opened this door, and it was magic. So that's my number one.
That's amazing.
My number one is that. And that's a winery that is, my Jurassic Park and my Billy Joel and all of that stuff combined, because it's the best. Have you guys been there? Or have you?
No, I haven't been.
No, but I do love those wines.
Yeah. And
I will do a honeymoon with the two of you anytime. And we will have to go to Rioja and go there.
Well, Jason, I mean, we know what was your runner-up because you kicked DRC off the list in real time. But Elaine, what was your runner-up? What didn't make the list but you wanted to talk about?
Well, I had that problem where, it's like I blanked, like I can't remember anywhere I've ever been.
Well, you've been a lot of places. I mean, that's what happens when you have to rank something, or
it's the ranking. It's like the pressure of choice,
Yeah.
I mean, well, so again, one of the most amazing wine experiences I've ever had, though. But again, it's like the cellar itself is nothing. But in inland Galicia, in Monterey, so close to the border of Portugal, Jose Luis Mateo makes Quinta de Moradea. And so this is like a totally different podcast episode because it's vineyards, but he, some of the work he's done is actually reclaiming varieties that were lost because of just the history of Spain and the volatility of the last century, and he like rediscovered them by going back into these abandoned mountain villages and just like walking vineyards around them and figuring out who does own these, who does live here, and starting to work with them again, and then studying the vines. And so I got to spend a week with him a few years ago and like walking these mountain vineyards. And we this is actually where I found this accidentally met this heavy metal bagpiper. We were like in this village, and he's like, no one lives here anymore except this one family. And he knocks on the door and says, "Oh, we just want to taste your wine." And, he'd worked with them and helped them resuscitate their vineyards and stuff. And so we went through their little house and then out the back and into this little semi-sunken garage type room. And they make their home wine back there. But this is like, this little sunken room was over 100 years old. And it was, in Galicia, everybody's smaller. Like literally the people are like, the average height is lower there than here. So, my head was like a few inches from the ceiling, except then off the ceiling, they're drying all these grapes on one side and sausages on the other. So I'm like bumping between grapes and sausages walking around, and they're pulling wine out of these old, like make do tanks, They had just like walked down the slope of their backyard and picked grapes and then made wine in their little sunken cellar. And so it's like, there's nothing grand about that. But again, it's just, my God, like the intimacy of a lot of these experiences, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Galicia, the culture and history and the mountainous, the survival of those people is pretty wild. I'm working on something with that Cup of Salvation that peripherally they're, well, anyways, Kelly, what did you leave off?
Oh, well, the one I really wanted to talk about, but it X'd off my list is one of the most amazing winery visits I've ever had in terms of that kind of visceral impact that I think we're all sort of dialed into in this conversation, was Domaine Mercuri in Greece. And Mercuri.
Wow, Greece, cool.
And it's just this like amazing kind of ancient ambling estate where you can cut down to the water, and there are peacocks everywhere. But I didn't like giant dogs and just like crazy vegetables. And it's an incredible place, and the wines are beautiful. But I cannot remember the inside of the cellar. But everything else about the estate and the grounds is so beautiful. And I'm just like, I was furiously Googling like pictures to try to justify including it on this list. But I just remember kind of being in, they have a little like kind of wine museum, which is sort of where they seat you to taste the things with these old artifacts of wines manufacture. But it's all sort of crumbling, but also seems eternal. And And I remember tasting wine, and this peacock kind of strolls sort of proudly in, and there's a lot of peacocks there. And I don't know if you've ever, peacocks are very exciting to be around, but they have this very jarring song, should we call it?
That meow thing they do? It's
it's like a really loud.
But this ties perfectly into the show we're developing for you, Kelli.
Yeah, exactly. Because I feel like it's sort of the heavy metal bagpipe of the bird kingdom.
Oh my God.
It's about as melodic and relaxing for our lullaby album.
Yeah. This is great. Ladies, this is this is so fun. I want to do this over and over and over again. I literally doing this, I've written down 7 more winery cellars that I thought I should have had on this list, like Turlan and Alto Adige and all these places. I'm like, why did I not put these on here? Anyways, we could do this forever, and I cannot thank you enough for doing this. I hope everybody gets out and goes and visits some of these places if you can get in.
Always great to connect with both of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I look forward to drinking and driving in Australia with both of you. Bye. Today's episode of the Somm TV podcast is also brought to you by Cuvée Collective. We have a very special message from one of my favorite winemakers in Napa, Dan Petrosky at Massican Winery.
I'm Dan Petrosky at Massican Winery. I've partnered with Cuvée Collective to bring NFT holders like you into the world of all things Massican. Join me at in-person events around the country or for a virtual tasting where we can connect, share stories, and drink a great glass of wine. Looking forward to seeing you then.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning into the Somm TV podcast. Remember, if you go to sommtv.com, you can find hundreds of hours of content, including some of the greatest sellers in the world, like Lafitte Rothschild, many of the ones that we have mentioned on this very podcast. You can find that stuff nowhere else. sommtv.com. We really appreciate it. Everybody, please be safe and drink something good. Life's too short.